Hilche Shluchin V'Shutfin Perek Shishi. Now in Perek Dalet and Perek Hey we learned about the halachas of Shutfim. In Perek Dalet we learned about how you become Shutfim. And Perek Hey how the Shutfim should deal with each other, that everything is hakel bepashtus, is committing a medina, what a Shutfim is allowed to do, what a Shutfim is not allowed to do, what the Shutfim can insist on, what he can't insist on, various different dinim that we learn in Perek Hey. Now, the shutfim, when they become shutfim, so they invest their money together, and they work together on this money, so they can make up with themselves whatever deal they want to make up. In other words, let's say one of them is more talented, the other one's not so talented. So Mela, this one is obviously going to be able to earn more, and the other one is earning less, or he's not so important for the business. So Mela, you can make up accordingly how much each one will receive from the profits, and how much the other one will receive from the profits, and how much loss one will have to take, and how much loss the other one will have to take. Everything they make up as it is. That's push. They could make the shutfim can make up amongst each other whatever deal they make up, whatever they agree on. Now then there's another mitzias, that's called shutfim, that they invested together and they're working together. Then there's another mitzias of a person that there's an investor and there's someone that's working. We'll call him, there's the balamois, and there's the misasik, the way the Rambam calls him. There's the person that's investing the money and the person that's actually managing the money, and he's dealing with the money and trying to make business with the money. So here, if they made up a deal, so they made up a deal as we'll learn Behemshech. Masha'inkin, if they didn't make up any deals, so Chazal instituted that the Pashtus Hadvarim is that when someone gives someone money, and he says that you should invest this money, you should manage this money and try to make business with the money. So the Pashtus Hadvarim is that it's a Chotzi Milva and a Chotzi Pikadon. It's a Chotzi Milva and a Chotzi Pikadon, which means half of it is a loan, and half of it still belongs to the original investor, and the manager just has the investor's money. Memela, what happens if all of that money gets lost? All of that money gets lost. So the pashtos is that when a person loses a loan, so he has to pay for it. When a person loses a pikadon, and if it was done ba'inus the pikadon was lost, so then you don't pay anything back to the mafkid. So there's here also, if you have an investor, and the investor gave it to the manager, and if we're saying that it's half a loan and half a pikadon, so it comes out that let's say the manager would lose all the money, so then half of the money he would have to still pay back because he's a loiva, and on the other half, which is a pikadon, and there was a nanas, so mainly is potter. That's l'chura the pashtus advar. So l'chura huadin, you should say that the schar should also be b'amtza. The schar should also be b'amtza. There's the losses b'amtza, and al derech the schar is b'amtza. What's type of schar is b'amtza? So if they gain it, he gave him $100. So we're saying $50 of the $100 is a halva, and $50 of the $100 is a pikadon. And therefore, if he loses the $100, all of the $100, so $50 he has to return, and $50 he doesn't have to return. $50 he has to return because it was halva. If not, $50 he doesn't have to return because it was a pikadon. Now, what happens if this $100 made another $100? So the pashtus advarim is that 50 of those dollars were made through the halva money, which belongs to the manager, because it's his money. He owes the money. He owes for the money, but the money that he took as a loan is his money. And the other $50 was made by the pikadon money, and that belongs to the investor. So Memela, so they divide the profits 50-50, and they divide the losses 50-50. That would be the pashtus advar. The problem is that there's a problem of ribis over here. Why problem of ribis? The investor gave the manager $100. We're saying $50 of it was a loan, and $50 was a pikadon. Now this manager is going and he's working for the investor on the $50 of his money. Now the $50 of the loan is the money that belongs to the manager, but the $50 of the other $50 belongs to the investor. Why is he working on the investor's money? Why is he working on the investor's money? He's not getting paid for it. The answer is because since this investor lent him $50, he gave him the Vaila another $50 with this halva, which is pikadon. So because he gave him the $50 as halva, so Memela he also has to return to him any profit, or he has to work on this pikadon in order to generate profit for the investor. So basically, what's happening is that this manager is working on the money with the money of the pikadon because of the loan that the Bala Pikadon gave him, which is the investor. And it's not the ribas deraisa, because first of all, it's not 100% of the money is going to come, and it's not ribas ksutza. It's not ribas deraisa, but it's midrabon, it's considered ribas. Because Lepel, he's giving back the investor something because of the loan. And in order to take that, there has to be that the manager is getting something for working on the pikadon. If he's getting paid for working on the pikadon, so Mela comes out that it's a good deal, everything's a good deal, whereas he's going to have half of the money, the profit, and he's going to have half of the losses, both ways it'll work. He's working for the investor without getting paid for it, he's getting paid for it. So if he's getting paid for it, there's no problem. The issue is if he's not getting paid for it, and that's what we're going to learn behemshech to these halachas. We're inside. Perek Shishi. Shnayim sheinoisen v'noisen b'mamen hashutfus. You have mamen hashutfus, and they're both working with the mamen hashutfus. Is aval pisha mamen shalechadem, even if one of them was the investor, Lepel. But Lepel, since they're both working in the shutfus, so memela harei nikra shutfus. That's called a shutfus because they're both working in this deal, and therefore v'impochasu heisiru. If they lost, if there was a loss on the deal, or there was a gain, harei le'emtza. The pashtus advarim is that they divided equally. Although one of them invested, and Lepel, they're both working it equally, but they invested it, now it became both of theirs. There's the money, one of them invested, but it became money that belongs to both of them. So obviously the other person has a loan. The person has a loan, but he's working on his money as well. In other words, the money belongs to the shutfis, and now he's working on the money together with the other person. If there was a loss or there was a gain, they divided equally. And they can make up whatever deal they want. In other words, even though one of them invested the money, but nevertheless, since they're both working on the money, so the money really belongs to both of them, and they're both working on it, so they have a deal, whatever the deal is of their partnership. They're emissaries partners, they're working equally, everything's fine. However, there's only one person that's really working with the money. Now here the Rambam adds that even if the money belongs to both of them, but there's only one of them that's actually working with the money. Now this prat of the Rambam is b'amas ha'machlekes rishenim. If this din belongs also even mishal shneim, this is the Rif argues on this Rambam, but let's leave it for a second. There is only one person that's managing the money. Is aval pisha hamamen mishal shneim. In reality, this money came from both of them. Is harezu hashutvis nekras esek. So then this shutvis is called an esek. V'zeh hanoise v'noisen nikra misasik. He's called not a shutif, but rather he's called a misasik, which we'll call it a manager, a person that's running the business. Sharihu levadi misasik b'masu matan. Because he's the only one that's really running the business. He's the only one that's really working in the business. The shutfe and the other shutif, she'enin nesiv and nesen, is nikra balamam. So it's a different type of relationship. You have shutfim that both of them are working together in the money, and then even though only one of them invested the money, but Lepel, since they're both working together, they're called shutfim, and then you can have whatever deal you want. You can make up whatever deal you want. Masha'in came when you have one person is working on the money. One person is the person that's dealing with the money. He's the misasik. And the other person is not working with the money. He's the Bal HaMois. And the Rambam says even if both of them gave the money, but Lepel, there's one of the people that gave the money is not really working with the money. So Mele, he's only an investor, and he's not a person that's a misasik. He's not part of the shutfis. He's an investor. But on the other end, he's not working on the money. So then this din, what the Rambam is about to say, applies to him as well. We'll go back to this as well, but again, what others argue with this Rambam. And this prat, if it's Mishal Shneim. So again, if you have two people working together with the money, that's called shutfis. And then even if one of them invested the money b'peil mamish, and he's obviously going to get back his keren at the end, or whatever the deal is, so nevertheless they're called shutfis. I mean, mainly you can have whatever deal they have. Whatever deal they have. They can have that the schar is le'emtza and the hefsed is le'emtza, etc. Masha'in kain, if one of them gave the money, or both of them gave the money, but there's only one person that's being misasik, actually doing the business. So the person that gave the money and he's not being misasik, he is called the Bal HaMois, that we'll call him the investor. knows what we would call the investor, and the other person, he's called the misasik. He's the one that's actually doing the business. He's the one that's managing the money. He's the one that's managing the money. Halacha base. Tiknu chachamim shekol hanesin mois lechaveri lesasik bem. So there was one takana was that when someone gives someone money lesasik bem, and they didn't make up a deal. They didn't make up a deal. So Reuven gives Shimon money. He tells him he has $1,000, and you do business with this $1,000. And they didn't make up a deal. What's going to be? What happens if there's profit? What happens if there's loss? So the deal should be is yeh chatzi amom and b'teres halva. So therefore we say that half of the money is a loan. B'harei memela, if it's a loan, harei masasik chay b'achriyusei, because when you get a loan, you have to pay back the loan regardless. Avol b'shavet b'einis, because for halva, oinus doesn't mean anything, because as soon as he gave the money, it was his. And this other half is b'teres b'kodin, and v'hareihu b'achrayis balamois. It's still b'achrayis of the original owner, the investor, and therefore v'mnigna v'yovad chatzi shel b'kodin eina misasik chayiv l'shalim, because it was a b'kodin. It's a b'kodin, and it's not considered a loan. So that's otakona de Rabbanan. The Rabbanan instituted when someone gives someone money, he invests money with someone. The question is, what's the deal? What happens if something happens? So the answer is, the deal is that half of it is a milva, half of it is a pikodin, and memela, if it gets lost, let's say all of it gets lost, so the milva has to be paid back, which is half of the money, and the other half, which was a pikodin that still belonged to the Bal HaMois, doesn't have to be paid back because it's the loss of the Bal HaMois. Now, lefichach, yeschar zu achetzi merviach shebal HaMois. So b'meila b'pashtus, once we establish that the half of the money is still the Bal HaMois's, so b'meila half of the money that this money generates, the money that this money generates belongs to the Bal HaMois. It belongs to the Bal HaMois. So which means the pashtus, that let's say he gave him $1,000, and lepel from this $1,000 came out $2,000. So 500 of the second 1,000 came from the 500 of the person that was misasik, of the person that had the loan, and the other 500 came from the 500 that was a pikadon. So it should belong to the Bala pikadon. That's a pashas advar. It comes out that the money of the Bala Mois was the one that earned the money. But according to this takana, it's impossible. That there's another problem, which we mentioned before, which is ribis. There's a problem that we should say that sai the hefset should be be'emtza and sai the schar should be be'emtza. That would be a problem. Why? What would be the problem? Again, the takana was that if someone gives someone money, someone gives someone $1,000. So we say this $1,000 is half milv and half pikad, and therefore, if he loses the money, so he lost all the money. So half of the milv he has to pay back, and half of the pikad he doesn't have to pay back. That's the pashtus. And l'chura the seichel would say that if half of it is pikad, so any money that the pikad generates is his. So in Mela, if all this money generated a certain amount of money, so they should split the schar lemtza. But the problem is, according to this takana, that all the monies should go down the middle, silas schar and silas hefsed. Why? If you're going to say that, is nimtza. So it's going to come on as we mentioned before. The investor invested $1,000. 500 of it was a halva. 500 of it was a pikot. Now the manager, the misasik, went ahead and he worked with this $1,000. So the $500 that was a halva, no, he worked for it. It was his money. Now, why was he working for the $500 of the investor? Why was he interested in working for the $500 of the investor to earn him money? The answer is because the investor lent him the other $500. And that was the deal, that he's going to work on both money. So it comes out that the money that the investor is getting back for his $500 is because of the loan that he gave to the manager. Nimtza comes out that Bal HaMammon is noitel schar chatzi mo'esav. He's taking the schar of the half of the money, she'im pikadon, the half of the money that he gave to the manager, to the misasik, which is pikadon, of ve'ein eisa klum. He's really not doing anything. He's getting the profit of his half of pikadon, but he's not doing anything. Elazar misasik tireach le bechatzi shel pikadon. Who's working with that money to generate the money that the Baal HaMois is getting is the person that's the misasik. And why is he doing that? Mipnei shmo'isav shelvo. He's doing it because he got a loan from me. The other $500 was a loan. So because of those $500 that was a loan, so he's also working on the other $500 of the investor. It's not ribus mamish. Again, because it's not vade that there's going to be a profit. And it's also not algemacht, a profit. But I'll call upon him, it's a vakribus. So memele v'heich yasu. If you want to have the taka, the schar, and the hefsed should be b'shava. In other words, you want to have a deal that the investor gives someone $1,000, and you want that it should be absolutely that no matter what, if the profit is halfway, they should split the profit halfway, and if the loss is halfway, they should split the loss halfway. How could they do that? There's an eitzah. The eitzah v'heich yasum reitzah lias haschar yehefsed lemtzah. The eitzah is b'shava. Whereas what's the problem? The problem is because Lepel, the misasig, is working for the investor, and the investor is getting money because he lent him. So the answer is make a pashta. Give the misasig, pay him for his work. Whereas the misasig is working every day for this investor. So pay him for his work. If you pay him for his work, so you say like this: I gave you $1,000. Reuven gave Shimon $1,000. 500 of it is a loan, and 500 of it is a pikad. Now this Shimon is going to work on all $1,000. So the $500 of the loan, that's his own money, it's no problem. Elamai, he's also working on the 500 of Reuven's. And Lechura, why is he working on the 500 of Reuven's? And so maybe Reuven is going to get half of the profit because half of the $1,000, 500 of is his. And that Shimon worked on it. Good, so Shimon is being paid for it. That's what he's saying. Is heichya. So im reit salas is aschar ehafsid laemtza b'shava. You should do both of them. Should be b'shava. Is yitl misasis chorish b'chol yem v'yem meyashutfas. Pay the misasig, make up with him how much he has to get paid per day of the meyashutfas. Kipel bottle keisel malachish bottle mimenu. Whereas he's doing business now. Lepel, he could have done something else, and he would have done something else. He would have gotten paid a certain amount. And Lepel, he's not doing that, so Memela, he doesn't want to get that amount. That's the din of a pale bottle, a person who's doing business, and Lepel is not doing the business. How much would he be willing to be a pale bottle, but not business? He would have been a worker, let's say. He would have been a worker in schlepping something. And Lepel, he would have gotten paid a certain amount per day. And Lepel, now he's not schlepping. So you pay him, how much would he be willing to not schlep and get paid? In other words, if he would have schlepped, he would have got paid $5 a day. And Lepel, if not to schlep, he'd be willing to get paid $3 a day. In other words, he's getting paid less, but he's not schlepping. So that's what you have to give him. That's the pale bottle. He gives him pale bottle. That's talking about if he has no other geschäft. So mainly this is a whole geschäft. So mainly since it's his whole geschäft, so you have to pay him pale bottle. There's other geschäften that he has. And L'churi, you have to understand, L'churi has geschäften because he's also working on his own money. Lepel is working on his own money together with this money. He's not really working only on this money. Whereas he's working on all of the $1,000. He's also working on his $500. But at the same time, he's working on his $500. So he's really not, so he's always L'churi has another geschäft, I'm saying. L'churi, and ask him shot, I don't know exactly. Is ain't tzarich lahalis lischar shel kol yom v'yom, ela fila hela leidiner b'chol yimei hashutfis also die. That would also be enough. In other words, you just give him a small amount, a token of appreciation. In other words, he's paying clearly for the fact that he's working with his pikadon. And then if it went up or went down, in other words, either they lost in this deal or they gained on this deal, is liya lemtza b'shava, so they'll split it exactly. V'chein. The same idea in Omerle. That's one option. One option is to pay him. Another option, v'cheinim Omerle, Kol harevach yeh lecha shlishei easirisei bischorcha. In other words, this, before we start splitting the profits, you're going to get a third of the revach of my pekadon. A third of the revach of my pekadon will be yours for working for my pekadon. Or you'll get a tenth of the profit of my pekadon. Is hail v'yeshli esek acher. So since he has another geschäft as well, we're talking about in a case where he has another geschäft, is areza mutter. And therefore, vim hivsid, yafsid mekza. So that was the deal. They made up a deal like this. Be'emes, it's chotzi milva, chotzi bikadon. And since it's chotzi milva, chotzi bikadon, so if he loses, it goes 50-50. Because he lost whatever he lost half of it was milva, half of it was bikadon. So im hivsid, yafsid mekza. Vim hoyezam, but mashagen, if they gained, so then he's going to have to get, from the gain of the pikadon, he's going to get a certain percentage. So just like when a person would hire someone to work for him, give him money, say, listen, this money is my money. It's my money. I'm achroy on the money. However, I want you to work and do business with it. Now, what are you going to gain from it? You're going to gain a certain percentage. If you're going to earn money over here, you'll get a certain percentage. If there'll be a loss, it's my loss. And if there'll be a gain, you'll gain a certain percentage. That's a good deal. That's not a problem. So over here also, you're asking, why is he doing the chetzi shel pikadon? So you're saying he's doing the chetzi shel pikadon because he got the milva. No, the milva he got, that's one thing. But for the chetzi shel pikadon, he's getting more. He's getting a certain percentage of the revach of the pikadon. That's what he's saying. Now, is that percentage really justify for him to work? So if him yeshli esek acher, so that percentage also justifies him to work. Whereas if he doesn't have any esek acher, so l'chura, that's the passage over here. Later, maybe the Rambam is going to be a little bit shver. But at this point in time, if he doesn't have any esek acher, you have to pay him kipel bottle. You can't just give him some minimal percentage. Masha'enkin, if he has esek acher, you could give him even a dinner for the whole work. So al derech's over here. Since he has an esek acher, you could give him. You don't have to give him per day the kipel bottle. You give him a certain percentage of his gain. That's what he's saying. If this misasig was his oris and the hoya le'esek acher, in other words, not only he was yesh le'esek acher, but he was also his oris. So mainly he's like very tied to him. Is ein tzarich lahalis lischar acher klal. Sha'oris mishubadu lebalasada. So therefore, there's no ribis here. There's no problem of ribis. So mainly, even if he gives them the money and they make up to be that the schar should be be'emtza, and the hefsa should be be'emtza, so then there's no problem. So normally, we're saying nachamal, when a person invests money with someone, so the pashtus of the investment is chotzi milva v'chotzi pikadon. That's the first takana. Chotzi milva v'chotzi pikadon. Since it's a chotzi milva v'chotzi pikadon, there can't be that the schar and the hefsa should be be'emtza, because when the schar is going to be be'emtza, the reason why the Bal HaMois is getting his schar without doing anything is because he lent the money, because of the chotzi milva, and that's vakribis. So therefore, there's an eitzah. The eitzah is either to pay him per day. That's one eitzah. Another eitzah would be is that, let's say he has a esek acher, so then he could just give him a dinner for the whole time. He's like paying him for being asking with the pikadon. And since he has other geschäften, so maybe he doesn't really have to pay him kepel bottle. Or if he has an esek acher, he could give him a certain percentage. In other words, he'll get, besides the half that he's getting for his milva side, he's also going to get a certain percentage of the money that the pikadon generates. In other words, there's, let's say, there's $1,000. And Lepel, it generated another $1,000. So Lepel, 500 of that $1,000 is the misasik, because it's from his milva that generated the money. The other $500 is l'chura from the pikadon. But why is he working on the pikadon? L'chura only because of the dalvos. So we say no, he's getting a certain percentage of that money that the pikadon generated, and for that he's getting paid, and that works if there's an esek acher. That's what I'm saying. If there's an esek acher, so then it works. And then the Rambam says that if he's an oris and the hoya le'esek acher, so then ein tzarich lahalis lischar acher klal, because the oris is meshubed, the memela, so that's not considered ribas, the fact that he's working for his person that he's an oris for when he has an esek acher. Halacha Gimel. V'oi tiknu chacham. In other words, besides the takana that we had until now, that the takana was that when a person gives on a bala mois, gives the money to the misasik, we know there wasn't clearly ogemacht a deal. So the deal is, the Chazal said that it's a chotzi milva, chotzi pikodin. So if the money gets lost, so the milva he has to pay, and the pikodin he doesn't have to pay. But on the other end, there's a concern if they're going to give, if the bala pikodin, he'll get for his half the profit, so it's going to come out that it's avakribis, because lepel because he lent him the other money, the other half, so therefore he's getting paid, he's getting the profits of the pikadon without being working, because the misasik is the only one that's misasik in this business. So therefore, there's an eitzah, either you should pay the person that's the misasik kespel bottle, and in certain cases you could pay him a not kepel bottle if lepel he has a esek acher, or you can give him a certain percentage of the gain. That's the ways that, in order to avoid that, there should be this problem of avakribis. Now that was takana number one. Halacha gimel ve'et tiknu chacham. Shekol hanesin mois lechaveri l'sasik b'hem. Lepel upachas o hisiru. There was a pchas or there was hisiru. And v'lei rotzel little ischaram b'ol b'chol yem. Lepel he didn't want to pay this person the misasik. The bala mois didn't want to pay the misasik ischaram b'ol b'chol yem. And they didn't make up any deal. So the question is, right now, what happens? There was a loss or there was a gain? How do we deal with it? So on that, the takana was that he should earn from the revach of the pikadon, he should get a third of that revach of the pikadon, which really means that it's a sixth of the revach of all the money, because the pikadon is only half of the money. So a sixth of the revach of all the money is a third of the revach of the pikadon. That's a third of the revach of the pikadon. Shehu shtus revach kol hamamon, which comes out to be a sixth of the revach of kol hamamon. Lefichach, imir vichu, if lepel there was a revach, is yitel ha-misasik shnei shlishi ha-revach. So the misasik is going to end up getting shnei shlishi ha-revach. Which means, what's the cheshbon of shnei shlishi ha-revach? Chatzi ha-revach shel chatzi ha-moy shein milva. And also, shtus ha-revach b'schorish nisasik b'pikadon is nimsa hakel shnei shlishi ha-revach. So the cheshbon is poshel, mashal, he gave him $1,000, lamazam. In Lepel, they earned $300. They earned $300. So be'emes machza should be that they're getting 150. But he's taking now from that 150 that the Bala Pikadon is supposed to get, he's entitled to 50, which is a third of the 150, which is a sixth. The 50 is a sixth of all the Revach. So mainly he's going to end up taking that 50. So Lepel is going to end up being that the Bal HaMom has 100, and the Misasig has 200. So he gets 2/3 and he gets 1/3. And V'yitin Bal HaMom Shlisha Revach. That's works if they profited. So if they profited $300. So Memela, so the Misasig gets the $200, and the Bal HaMois gets $100. And this is compensating him for his work, that it shouldn't be considered that his work was because of the alva. Now, again, because they didn't make up another compensation. So Chazal instituted this is the compensation. V'im pochasu, and if Lepel there was a hefsid, so then is yafsid ha-misasig shlisha pchas. So now the misasig loses only a third. So l'chura, again, they started off with $1,000, and now there's only $700 left. So they lost $300. The question is l'chura, since it's chatzi milva chatzi pikadon, so he should have the loss of 150. He should have a loss of 150. So we say no, that if there was a hefsid, he only is going to lose 100, and the other one is going to lose, the Bal HaMois is going to lose 200. Why? Sharehu chai b'chatzei apchas. Be'emes, the misasig is chai b'chatzei apchas b'pnei shchatzei hamois milva. Because since he half of it was a milva, so Mela he lost the original milva. He lost, there was $1,000, 500 of it was milva, 500 was 100 was pikadon, 300 of the $1,000 was lost. So basically, 150 of the milva was lost, 150 of the pikadon was lost. Aber Lepel, he was working with this money. He has to be compensated. How is he going to be compensated by this money? So he's going to be compensated by the fact that the loss, that really it's his loss, it'll be taken by the Baal HaMois. The Baal HaMois will be the one that's taking this loss. V'yesh lo ishtus b'schorei, b'eiseh chetzi shel pikodin. So in other words, this chetzi shel pikodin, ein nechnami, he lost money, but lepel, he was misasik in the chetzi shel pikodin, so he has to get paid for it. How is he getting paid for the chetzi shel pikodin that he was misasik? By the fact that the Baal HaMois is taking away a third of that loss, a third of the loss that should have been to the Baal to the misasik, which is his halva. A third of that loss is being taken by the Baal HaMois. He only ends up paying a third of the pras. He has to pay a third of the pras. And the Baal HaMois is yafsid only 2/3 of the pras. So the cheshbon is because a third of the pras of the misasik is being taken over by the Baal HaMois. So Mela comes out that 2/3, it's just like the same way like we had by the schar, just like the schar, he gets the schar, a third of the schar of the Baal HaMois. So al derech zeh over here, the Baal HaMois takes away a third of the pchas of the Baal of the Misasik. That's this din. So that's this din in a case when they didn't make up any deals. Whereas if he wants to pay the Baal HaMois, the Baal HaMois wants to pay the Misasik, whatever for a kapel bottle or some type of a payment like we made up before, so garnish it, then you don't have to do this. So then he's being compensated. But this was a takana. If lepel they didn't give him any compensation, so what's going to be his compensation? So if there was a gain, his compensation is that he gets an extra third of the Baal HaMois's gain. And if there was a loss, so the Baal HaMois takes that loss from the Baal, from the Misasik's loss. That's this din. Halacha dal yesh mishatei ve'emer shahanoisen esik stam, which is the case of halacha gimel, is im yesham schar yitla misasik chetzye. The im hoyesham hefsid is only yapsid shlish ve'ina davar ken. So in other words, there are some that learn that this takana d'Rabbanan was only working in the case of a hefsid. In other words, if there'll be a schar, so then they'll both get equal the schar. The misasik and the Baal HaMois will divide the schar equally. It's just that the schar is going to be that in the says what's the schar? The schar is that in the event that there's a loss, so the Baal HaMois will take over the loss, take off a third of the misasik's loss. Nachamal. Yesh mishatei ve'emer shanesen esik stam im yesham schar is yitla misasik chetzye. The misasik gets half of it, not 2/3, but only half. The hoyesham hefsid. And if there was a hefsid, so then is yafsid shlish. Not he won't be mafsid half; he'll be mafsid only a third. Ve'ina davar kain elim kain hisnal davar zeh befedish. If they made a clear deal that should be the deal, that if there'll be a schar, they should divide it 50-50, and if there'll be a hefsid, so then the Baal HaMois will take over a third of the hefsid. So that's beseder. V'cheinim hefsid, they don't have to make such a big deal. Sheyavsid hamisasig mechza, they can make the deal fakert. That if there's a hefsid, then the misasik will lose half of the hefsid. Then yesham schar is yitl shnei shlishi harevach. He'll take 2/3 of the revach. It could be both ways. Either, there has to be that they can't be 50-50 on both sides. Because if 50-50 on both sides, so it comes out that the misasik is not getting anything for the fact that he's misasik in the person's mois, in the person's pikadon's mois, except for the fact that he got a loan, and that's avak ribus. So therefore, in order to avoid that, so therefore you have to have that there's some type of a gain to the misasik. Either the gain is that he's going to gain when there'll be a revach, he'll gain extra, or if there'll be a loss, he'll lose less. So in other words, even though l'churi has an option to gain, but on the other hand, he'll lose less than he'll gain. So in other words, he has an option to gain half, if there'll be a revach, but lepel, if there'll be a loss, so then the other person will compensate him for the loss. That's his payment for the fact that he's being misasik in his pikadon. V'cheinim hisnu, shim yesham schar yitla misasik chiyusik. V'im yesham hefsid is yafsid asirisik. Because if there'll be a gain, so then the misasik will get 1/9 of this gain. And if there'll be a loss, so then he'll lose a 1/10 of the loss. Now, l'chura, what's the cheshbon? L'chura, what he gains and what he loses represents what part is a pikad and what part is a milva. So l'chura, if we're saying that if there's going to be a schar, he'll take 1/9, So l'chur, if there'll be a hefsid, he should also lose a ninth. And if he's losing only a tenth of the hefsid, it means only a tenth is the loan. So why is he gaining a ninth? The answer is no. That the loan, let's say, is only a tenth. A tenth is a loan, and therefore, if there's a hefsid, he has to lose the tenth. He loses the tenth because that's a loan. If the loan is only on the tenth, so why is he getting a ninth? Why is he getting a ninth? L'chura, his money is only a tenth. The answer is because since he's working with the other 9/10ths, so he's being compensated with working with the pikadon, which is the other 9/10ths. What's he being compensated? He's being compensated a very, very small amount. The difference between a ninth and a tenth. The difference between a ninth and a tenth is a very small amount. That's what he's being compensated. And lepel, that could also be enough of a compensation. In other words, if that was made up lechatchila, that's the Kesef Mishnah is over here. Because before we were learning that there's shiurim, how much the compensation has to be. He has to give him kipel bottle, him yeshli yisikacher, he can give him a lesser amount, but there's shiurim of how much he has to compensate him. The Kesef Mishnah says, according to the Rambam, that's only if there wasn't a deal lechatchila when he gave him the money. When he didn't give him the money, and later on there's a gain or there's a loss, and now the question is to compensate him, so then there's the dinim that we learned in Halacha Beis, how much you have to compensate him. Either kapel botulum, yeshli yisikacher, he could give him less. Masha'enkin, if, according to the Shittas Rambam, if l'chatchila in the deal, when a person comes and he gives the person money, and he makes up clear that if lepel there'll be a loss, so then he'll lose only a tenth. But lepel, if there'll be a gain, he'll gain a ninth. So he's gaining a drop more than the loss. So since the gain is a little bit more than the loss, so memela, so that's already considered a compensation for what he's doing in the pikadon. Memela takes away the chashash of ribis. That's the Shittas Rambam. That's what Hail v'histu sheyeh rava kamasasik geisel of seidi tznoy kayim v'teis v'zeh keneged amalek. Now Rabbi say heiru sheinat nayazem mail elim kein oil misasik eisagacher. That even in a case where they made up l'chatchila, it would only work this minimalistic amount if he had an esig Avon only esig acher, it's sort of she's chara misasig. Yes, I'll say the bishtus k'meisha biyarnu. It has to be a bigger amount, which is what the Ram said earlier. But the Ram was saying that earlier because according to the Ram, that's only talking about if they come to make up later. They come to make up later, and the original deal wasn't with a t'nai, so he has to give him that shtus. Masha'inkin in a case where they make up l'chatchila, shezed davar osru, ve'inat nai male, but that's what they hold. That's what Rabbi say holds. Masha'inkin, the Ram says, the Ram holds that if you make up l'chatchila, a t'nai, if a person gives someone money with t'nai, and the t'nai is clear that lepel, there's going to be more of a profit than a gain, than a loss, so mele it comes out, so he's gaining something. The misasik is gaining something, and memela, so then it takes away the chashav of akribis, and memela, it's a good deal. Halacha hey. Now we learned until now that when a person invests money with somebody, there's the Baal HaMois and the misasik, and he gives him money, and they didn't make up any deal. They didn't make up a clear deal. What should be the deal between them? So stam investment, we say it's a chotzi milva, chotzi pikadon, and then Chazal instituted that if lepel, since it's a chotzi milva, chotzi pikadon, so the pashtus is side the schar and side the hefshet should be lamtza. But on the other hand, there's going to be a problem with havak ribis. So Milan, that is the eitzah either to pay the misasik kipel bottle, or if the misasik yeshli esik acher, you can pay him less than kipel bottle, or if he says yeshli esik acher and he's also on others, there's different ways of how you deal with it if there was no deal at all. If there was no deal at all. And then we learned what happens if lepel there was an upmach. So the Rambam holds, the Shittas Rambam is if there was an upmach, they made a clear upmach. So as long as the misasik is gaining more than he's losing, so in other words, even if there'll be a loss, he'll lose a tenth. And if there'll be a gain, he'll gain a ninth, which is mamish very small amount difference. But nevertheless, lepel, since the gain is going to be more than the loss, that compensates for his being misasik in the Baal HaMois' money, because the problem over here is that he's working on the Baal HaMois' money, and the only thing that he got for it was the loan from the Baal HaMois. If he's working on the Baal HaMois' money, and the only thing he got from the Baal HaMois was the loan, so that's considered avak ribis. So therefore he has to be getting something more. So he's like getting a certain percentage, a shtickle percentage of what the Baal HaMois' money is making. So Mela, since he's losing a tenth, knows if there's a loss, he'll only lose a tenth. So Mil comes out, And lepel, if he's gaining, he's going to be gaining a ninth. So it comes out he's getting something from the balamoisis pikodin extra, and memela that's compensating him if that was the deal for his work. Now the Rambam Halacha talks about in a case where they made up a deal, but the deal was only there'll be a gain. There was no deal what'll be if there'll be a loss. Now they made up clear that if there'll be a gain, so this is how much the balamois will get, and this is how much the mesasik will get. Masha'inkin, if there'll be a loss, so they didn't make up a deal. So pashtus, if there'll be a gain, so they do what they made up. That's pashut. Masha'inkin, if there'll be a loss, and if the din is going to be that he's going to lose the same amount that he would have gained, so again, so it's a problem of avakribis. So in other words, basically, the misasik borrowed money, and that money that he borrowed, if it makes money, so it's his money according to the percentage that he borrowed, and if he loses money, he loses that money. So why was he working on the investor's money? L'chura, he's working for free, or he's working because he got the loan, and that's called avakribis. So therefore, there has to be something that the Baal HaMois is compensating the misasik with, in order to justify that the misasik is not working because of the loan. The misasik is working because he's being compensated. Now, how is he being compensated? So here the Rambam is going to bring B'Shem Rabbeisai that he'll be compensated by the fact that, it's hard to understand, but we'll learn Behemshech, he'll be compensated by the fact that the person, the Baal HaMois, will add to his loss a third of his loss, and that third of his loss will be taken away from the Mesasik. We'll learn Behemshech. Halacha hey. Heiru Rabbeisai. She'im hisnu, the deal was, she'itla Mesasik shleisha chalakim naschar. This is one case. That they made up a deal that the Mesasik, which means the person that's working with the money, he's going to get 3/4 of the schar. Ubala mois revi aschar. So basically, what does that mean? If he's getting 3/4 of the schar and he's getting 1/4 of the schar, nimtza revi amois bulvad b'teres pikodin. So basically, 1/4 of the money is still a pikodin, and that therefore the Baal HaMois is getting the profit of that quarter. And the other 3/4 is a loan, and that's why the misasik is getting 3/4 of the schar, because that money is his. He borrowed the money. Now, lefichoch im hoyeshem hefset lepel, if there'll be a loss, they made up about the schar. They didn't make about the loss. If there'll be a loss, so again, you can't have that they should lose the same amount like they gained, because then there'll be a problem of ribis. So the misasik has to be compensated by the Baal HaMois. How is it going to be compensated? Is Yavsid HaMisasik Shloisha Revia Hefsid. So the Misasik loses L'chura de Pashtus 3/4 of the loss. 3/4 of the loss is his, because 3/4 of the money is his. 3/4 of the money is Alalva, is his. However, Pochis Shlisha Revia, minus 1/3 of a quarter. He loses 3/4 of the loss. 3/4 of the loss is his, and you deduct 1/3 of a quarter of the loss, 1/3 of a quarter of the loss. That's, you deduct from his loss, and that's how much the misasik loses. And v'yafsid Baal HaMois revia, and he loses 1/4 plus ushlish revia, plus or shlish revia. So it's 1/4 plus 1/3 of a quarter. Shehu shlish kol hafsid, which ends up being shlish kol hafsid. In other words, there's 3/4 and there's 1/4, and there's 1/3 of a quarter. So let's say we'll make the quarters into 12ths. We'll make the quarters into 12ths. So each quarter is 3/12ths. So it comes out that he l'chura should lose 9/12ths, and he should lose 3/12ths. Lepel, he's losing an extra 1/3 of the quarter, so he's losing, instead of 3/12ths, he's losing 4/12ths. And he's losing a 1/3 of a quarter less, so instead of losing 9/12ths, he's losing 8/12ths. So it comes out that he's losing 8/12ths and he's losing 4/12ths, so he's losing 2/3 and he's losing 1/3. Pashut. Case of the Rambam says the case. What's the case? Nasan loy meya dinrim al tnai. He gave him 100 dinrim, and lepel v'chosru arba v'esrim, and they ended up losing 24 out of the 100. They lost 24. So if they would have gained, the gain would have been the 3/4 of the gain would have been to the misasik, and 1/4 of the gain would have been to the Baal HaMois. Lepel, they ended up losing 24. So Be'etzim, the Shuras Hadin is that the Misasik should lose 6. The Misasik should lose 18, and the Balamoy should lose 6. That's the Shuras Hadin, because he has 3 quarters and he has a quarter. But on the other end, since we want that the Balamoy has to compensate the Misasik for working with his money, so Memela, it's okay. So not only Meir Dinim Al Tnaize V'Chosra Arba V'Esrim is Balamoy's Mafsik Shmeina. The person that invested the money, he loses 8. And the Misasik, he only loses 16. So he loses 2/3, and he loses 1/3 of the loss. Anything that the Bala Mois has in the schar, in other words, whatever portion he's entitled to in the schar, is im yesham revach, is netel k'mishaisno. So in other words, if he has a certain percentage of the schar, so he gets that percentage. V'im yesham hefsid, but if there's a loss, is yafsid oisei achelik, so he loses the loss that he, because for sure he loses, whatever of the money of the bikodim that was lost, plus tois v'shlishay. In other words, he adds 1/3 to his loss. In other words, that's how he's compensating the manager, the Misasik, that he's adding 1/3 to his loss. In other words, he had a loss of a quarter, in the first case. There was a quarter and there was there was 24. So Be'etzem, since the Bikodim is 6, and the Bikodim is a quarter rather, and the Halva is 3/4, so Be'emes he lost 6 and the other one lost 18. But on the other end, how is he compensating the Misasik? By taking another 1/3 of his loss. In other words, besides the loss of 6, he's taking another loss of 2. Besides the loss of the quarter, he's taking another 1/3 of the quarter. That's what we said before. So over here, instead of just losing 6, he's losing 8. And Memela, the Misasik, instead of losing the 3/4, he's losing 3/4 minus 1/3 of the quarter. 1/3 of the quarter. That's what's coming out of it. Valder Zalelim, Kol Chelik Sheyesh Balamois Beschar, Im Yesham Revach, is Netel Kmeshiyisno. Aber Vim Yesham Hefsid, Yavsid Oisei Achelik V'Teis V'Shlishi. That's according to the Cheshbon, that he's always going to take an extra 1/3 to his loss. Instead of losing a quarter, he's going to lose a quarter plus 1/3 of a quarter. Aber Nimtzas Lamed Lefimi Dezu. So the Ram is saying, look, a quarter come out. So here was the case was that the 3/4 was to the Misasik and a quarter was to the Balamois, and he just added 1/3 to that quarter, so it ended up being 1/3 of a quarter. So it ended up that side the Balamois lost the money, and side the Misasik lost the money, but instead of the Balamois losing 6 and the Misasik losing 18, what happened was that the Misasik lost 16 and the Balamois lost 8. Okay. But Nimtzas Lamed Lefimi Dezu, what will be in a case Shem Hisnu Sheitla Misasik Reviaschar? That L'chatchila, not the Misasik takes 3/4. What happens if L'chatchila the Misasik was only supposed to take a quarter of the schar? Is impochas. So l'chura now, what happens if there was a loss? So it's going to come out that the Balamois is taking the loss that he had plus another 1/3 to his loss. Just like before, he took the loss of a quarter plus 1/3 of the quarter. So over here, he's going to be taking 3/4 of the loss bepashtus, because 3/4 of the money is a pikadon. So bepashtus, 3/4 of the money is his loss. But now, if he's adding another quarter to his loss, it means he's adding another quarter to the 3/4. So it comes out that the Misasik has no loss. Lama lefimi dezushim hisnu shita Misasik revia aschar impochas leishalim Misasik klum. Why? The pastor says since he borrowed a quarter, since he would have gotten a quarter of the schar, which basically means that a quarter of it is milva, so l'chura he's really should also be getting a quarter of the loss. But lepel, since he's being compensated by the fact that the Bal HaMois is taking an extra 1/3 of his loss, he's adding to his loss. The Balamois is adding 1/3 to his loss, so his loss be'etzim satshuras hadin, since he's the spikot is 3/4 is 3/4, he's adding a third to that, so he's taking the whole loss, he's adding another quarter. So it comes out what he was supposed to lose, he was compensated from the balamois. And this would work this way. Let's say their deal, the Rambam first spoke a case where the deal was about the gain, not about the loss. And Memela, so he's compensated on the loss by the fact that he gives back a third of the loss that he had. He compensates the misasik. Now the other way, they made up about the pchas and they didn't make up about the revach. Is in pachasu is pichas hamisasik v'mashesnu. If they lost, so then he'll take a lose as they made up the whatever they made up. However, v'mhisifu, if they added, so now is noitla misasik me'esik achelik shayamafsid. So first of all, he takes according to the chelik that he would have been mafsid, and also v'teis v'shlish mashenotel balamois, and he takes another third of what the balamois was entitled to take. So that the Rambam Taitru is ketzet. Hisnu shem hoyishem hefsid yifsek hamisasik revia. The deal was that if there's a loss, the person that's the manager, the misasik, he'll lose a revia. So basically it means is that a revia was the loan, and the other 3/4 was the pikot. And lepel v'hifchisu, and lepel they lost. So takim misham revia pchas. So he has to pay a quarter of the loss. That was the deal. However, what happens v'meisiru if they made money? So then, since he's taking what he was entitled to plus a third of what the balamois was entitled to. So again, he was entitled, a quarter was a loan and 3/4 was a pikot. So Mela, and therefore, if there's a loss, he loses a quarter, the other one loses 3/4. Now, there was a gain, so obviously he's entitled to a quarter of the gain because it's his money. It was from the milva that he gained. But besides that, he's also, in order to compensate him for his working for the balamois, he has to get a third of the gain of the balamois. So he's going to end up getting a third of the balamois' gain. The balamois is entitled to 3/4. He's taking a quarter of it, so he's going to end up taking a half. That means his quarter plus the third of the balamois' 3/4, which is another quarter. That's what he's saying. V'misiru is neitel machza. And the Rambam seems to say that this makes sense. These are things that make sense. But nevertheless, says the Rambam, if you're going to make such a cheshbon, it's going to end up that could be the manager is going to end up making a loss, and he's going to end up getting money from the loss. Because rather than losing money, he's going to end up gaining money from the loss. And as the Rambam is going to say the cheshbon behemshech, that the more he loses, the more he's going to gain. Which the Rambam says can't be a true din. That can't be a din. Which the Rambam is saying on one hand, the Rambam says the saying of us dvarim elu shehelu divri tamei, but on the other hand, it can't be bepel. She says, why am telech al derav zu shema misasik efsheshiv chizvit l'schar. So in other words, what's the deal? The deal was both ways. Sai, in other words, benegei the schar. If they made up about the schar, and then lepel there was a pchas, so the Baal HaMois has to compensate the Misasik that besides a third of the amount of money that he's losing, he owes to the Misasik. Whereas he's going to compensate him an extra third of the money that he's losing, which is very hard for me to understand. L'chatchila, what's the seichel over here? What's the seichel that he should add a third of what he's losing to the Misasik? I mean, what? So Bishlema, when you're saying a third of the gain, so when the Misasik, they made up about the loss. And then the question is, what's going to be with the gain? So we say the Misasik is going to take a third of the investor's gain. That I understand. That makes sense. But l'chura, the fact that the Misasik is going to take a third of the investor's loss, what's the cheshbon loss? He wants to be compensated for his loss. So maybe you want to compensate to minimize his loss, to minimize the loss of the of the person that's being misasik. But what's the seichel? How is there a seichel that he should be taking according to the amount of loss? In other words, if there was a bigger loss, so he's taking more. It's hard to understand. Ketzad. The deal was that if there'll be a profit, the misasik, the manager, he will get 1/7 of the profit. And lepel, that was the deal. Lepel upochasu. And lepel, there was a loss. There wasn't a profit, there was a loss. So now we're saying, in order for him to be compensated for his work, 1/3 of the loss of the investor he has to give to the manager. 1/3 of the loss of the investor he has to add to the manager. So ketzad ken sheisni mishitla misasik echad mishiva b'schar upachasu is nimtza neitla misasik echad mishiva yeser al zeh hefset. So it's going to end up that lepeil, the person that's the manager, and he had a loss, he's going to end up gaining. Ketzad ken shepachasu shiva dinim. They lost 7 dinim. 7 dinim. So l'chura mitzat shuras adin, shiva dinim. So 1 dinar is a loss of the manager because 1/7 of it was a milva. That's how much he would have gotten b'schar, and 6 were the loss of the balamois because 6 sevenths were a pikadon. Lepeil now the balamois has to compensate the manager. How is he compensating him? So we say besides his loss that he's taking, which is 6/7, that's pashut, he has to add 1/3 to his loss. He's adding 1/3 to his loss. What he's adding 1/3 to his loss? He has to add another 2 to his loss. And if he's adding another 2 to his loss, he has to give 1 to the manager, which is l'churips. It's very hard to understand what even the havamina that he should have to. What kind of havamina is there in this union? Ketzad geshepachas ushiva dinim harei masase gembele ani chayev l'chad dinar echad kviat mai. But on the other end, va'ata chayev l'shalom l'shnayim shehem shlish chelik hapikodin. There's 1/3 of the chelik hapikodin of the loss. You have to compensate me. So memela nimtza balamois chayev litli dinar b'schar sheifset shiva. So this person went ahead and from the money he lost 7, and because of that he's being compensated. He's being given 1. Ve'ilu hifsed arba'aser, if he would have lost 14. So then then he would have to give him 2 dinim, not 1 dinim but 2 dinim, because lepeil it's double. V'zeh tamer gadol, v'davar she'ein adasi v'elesei, ve'ein ze etzli ala k'midivri achalem. So the says the Rambam is saying be'etzem is something divri tamheim, but on the other end it's going to fear into things which are divri tamer in adas v'elesei and el k'midivri achalem. You have to understand the havamin l'chatchila. Why should there be a compensation? In other words, the compensation could maybe be in sharing the person's loss. As you could say, we'll share the other person's loss. In other words, even though shuras adin is that since there was a loan and since there was a pikadon, so this is how much the loss should be for the loan person bala pikadon. But lepeil he'll compensate him. He'll share the loss, but he should have to give him money. He should have to give him money for the loss. Why should he have to give him money? I'll call upon him. So that's aval haderech v'adin ha'emes she'irli shekol she'yarviach ha'mesasik. In other words, if they had a deal of how much they're going to gain, shekol she'yarviach ha'mesasik im yesham hefsid, is yafsid shnei shlishi ha'chelik she'yim arviach. What works is that he only loses 2/3 of what he would have gained. And on the other hand, and if they made up a deal about the hefsid, virvichu, is yitel k'mei esa chelik shoyim hafsid, and also taste with shlish chelik chaver. And that's taku the Rabbeis of the Ram also held out that way. In other words, that besides the gain he also gets 1/3 of the investor's gain. So in that prat he agrees. The Ram agrees to Rabbeis that lepeil if they made up about the hefsid. They made up that the hefsid will be a certain percentage of the hefsid. So lepel, if there was a hefsid, so you take according to the hefsid. Masha'inkin, if there was a gain, so he gets 1/3 of the investor's gain. He gets 1/3 of the investor's gain. Whatever the investor's gain is, he's entitled to 1/3 of that gain. So if there was a loss, so he loses according to what they made up. And if there was a gain, he gets 1/3 of the investor's gain. That's understandable. Now, fakert, if they made up what it'll be if there'll be a gain. So what happens when there's a loss? So when there's a loss, he gets those. So, for example, the Rambam says, let's say we had the case before. They made up to have he had a seventh and he had 6 sevenths. He had a seventh, he had a 6 seventh. So they made up that if there'll be a gain. So he will gain a seventh, and if there'll be and the other one will gain 6 sevenths. Now, what'll be if there'll be a loss? So if there'll be a loss, so instead of him losing the one, which is l'chura, that's what he should be losing, he's only going to be losing 2/3 of one. Knows a third of what he should have lost, he's not going to lose. And that's what the Rambam says for. Whatever the gain is going to be, im yeshem hefsed, it will be a loss, is instead of losing the same amount that he would have gained, no, yafsed only shnei shlishe hachelik shoyer marviach. So in the case before, if he would have gained, in other words, if he would have gained a seventh, so now when he loses, he only loses 2/3 of that seventh. Whereas in the case where they lost 7, and he was a seventh, he would have gained the seventh. So he only loses 2/3 of the 7th. But so then he gains the 1/3 of the other person's gain. So that's really al derech v'Rabbeinu Shel Rambam. Shekol nachamol. So v'hadin aval haderech v'hadina em shiroli shekol shiarviach hamasasik. Whatever the masasik, the deal was that the masasik should gain. Im yeshem hefsid is yafsid shnei shlishi achelik shorim raviach. He loses, but he only loses 2/3 of what he would have what he would have gained. And if they made up about the hefsid and lepel there was hervicho, there was a gain, is yitil k'mei eisei achelik shoyim afsid. He gets the same chelik shoyim afsid, and also v'teis v'shlish chelik chaver. Over here we deal with teis v'shlish chelik chaver. Now he gets 1/3 of what the other person was supposed to gain. Is the mitzvah same or the fimi the zushim hisno? Sheitla Masasik Revi Aschar, if Lepel they made up the deal that the Masasik should get Revi Aschar and Vehifsid, so instead of losing a quarter, he only loses Areza Mishalom Shtus. He only loses a 1/6. Why a 6? Because he's 2/3 of a quarter is a 1/6. 2/3 of a quarter is a 1/6. Like for example, if you'll take, let's say you have a quarter, and if we're going to translate it into twelfths, so a quarter is 3/12. So if you take off 1/3 of that quarter, means you're taking off 1/12 of those 3/4, so you end up with 2/12. 2/12 is a 6. So once you take off 1/3 of a quarter, you end up with a 6. That's the cheshbon. If the deal was that if there'll be a gain, he'll get a quarter of the gain, and lepel there was a loss, so instead of losing a quarter, he loses a 1/6. Because you're taking off 1/3 of the cheshbon, a 1/3 of the quarter. You're taking off 1/3 of the loss from the quarter. So mainly you take off 1/3 of the quarter, so you end up with have 6. Like we're saying, if you have the quarter is 3/12, you take off 1/3 of those 3/12 is 1/12. You end up with 2/12, which is a 6. If the deal was that he'll lose a revia, and lepel the hiviach, and lepel he gained, so now is neitel mechzer, so he gets half. Why? Because he's getting 1/3 of what the other one would have gained. Whereas the other one would have gained 3/4. Lepel, he would have lost 3/4. So now in the gain, he gets 1/3 of that gain, which is a quarter. And Mamela, he ends up being what half of his quarter plus the quarter of the Balamois. So that's the Shitas HaRambam. You have to understand the Shitas HaBeis. What's the seichel that the person, the misasik, should be compensated? Well, the Rambam doesn't seem to say that. The Rambam says divrei tamim. There's divrei tamim. He's being compensated 1/3 of the investor's loss. What's the seichel? 1/3 of the investor's loss. I mean, there was amount of money that he was working with. In Lepel, there was a loss. The question is, how much should he be compensated? So depending on how much he lost, that's how much he should be compensated. What's the seichel of the amount of the loss should increase or decrease the amount that he should be compensated? Don't know.